Welcome to the Imperial Truth. I'm your host, Eric, and today we're going to talk about the scenarios out of the Forges of Saturn journal. So, previously, we have kind of dipped our toes into this idea of forging a narrative and creating scenarios that are worthwhile for the Horus Heresy Third Edition. The core scenarios in the rule book, we've talked about them. The fact that one of them is just absolutely unplayable. So you really only have two scenarios, and I don't think either of them are particularly good scenarios. I'm not a big fan of pickup games or pickup game scenarios. I think that we should have a little bit more narrative to the game, especially given sort of the historical context. We've talked about all of this in previous videos, but just sort of reminding you of the general thought process here. And the goal in the long run is going to be to create maybe a scenario pack that we could play in a league. And if I get this done, maybe I'll run it in our local gaming store and see how it goes at some point. So there's that possibility. But for today, we're going to talk about the Forges of Saturn journal, which is I'm a little bit behind the trend here, but there are three scenarios in there, and I do think that these scenarios have some of the sort of core mechanics that I think make a good scenario. So it's worth talking about these scenarios and discussing them and figuring out what works in these so that we can steal those ideas moving forward. So let's talk about this. We're going to kind of put it all in perspective. And if you have thoughts about it, if you've played these scenarios, if you like them, if you don't like them, please let me know in the comments. And I'm always happy to go through them and see what you guys are saying, and sort of get a feel for where the community is at with this. But let's talk about this. And again, I'm a Mechanicum player. I only play Mechanicum. So a little bit about this is going to be Mechanicum focused with some of our perspectives. So so we'll talk about Forges of Saturn, and then we'll talk about the sort of additional thing that we have to layer in here. Unfortunately, with the DLC version of Horus Heresy Third Edition that we seem to find ourselves in. So we have new scenarios in the Forges of Saturn book. They are Line Advance, Breakthrough, and Dawn Raid. We'll go through each of these in turn, but there are some similarities between them, and those similarities make it a little bit easier to talk about the scenarios if we talk about all the similarities first. So all of these have attacker-defender dynamics. There is an attacking player. There's a defending player. I already like that aspect. I think we need more sort of attacker-defender style scenarios. And in a previous video, we talked about the fact that it maybe isn't even attacker-defender. It is almost like main character antagonist type scenarios where one side is trying to do a certain objective and the other side is trying to thwart them from doing that. And sometimes you are not the protagonist or the antagonist in the game. Sometimes your opponent is the main character, and main character does not mean attacker or defender. Main character doesn't even mean good guy or bad guy. It's just they are the one that's in charge, or the one that is trying to accomplish their objectives. In addition, and this is not a popular opinion all the time, we have set deployments, so they're random. It's not random deployments, and objective placement is fixed. Big fan of this. I think set objectives, set terrain, and set deployment are all really important in creating good narrative scenarios. Once the more gamey aspects we can introduce, so player placed terrain, player placed objectives, things like that, those tend to take away, I think, from the narrative aspect and make the game more about gotchas and more. Again, we talked about this in a previous video, this idea of the game being collaborative versus antagonistic. So in an antagonistic game, I'm trying to win. That's the goal of the game. In a collaborative game, we are trying to tell a story and we're both trying to have a good time. And it doesn't really matter who wins or loses because we both win if we have a good time. And I have made it very clear that my personal perspective, it does not have to be your perspective, but my perspective is that I prefer the collaborative aspect of the game. And I think Horus Heresy lends really well to that aspect, which is why I played exactly one game or two games. I spent one day playing games of 10th edition 40K in 2025. Yeah, and I don't know that I'll play any 40K in 2026. We'll see. I did play a 5th edition game though. That was pretty fun. So these missions have the Onslaught primary mission primary objective. That's similar to all of them. So once we cover that, we won't have to cover it again. And they all share the advancing objectives rules, which is an interesting rule. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I don't think I've played enough of these games to adequately understand how much I like or dislike this dynamic, but it is a very interesting way to approach the game. All right. There is one other thing that we have to kind of dip in here because the battlefield assets rule is part of all of these scenarios. And if you're not familiar, the battlefield assets occur in the Istvan 5 drop site massacre journal. So I'm going to give you the basic rules here. There are other channels where they actually have gone through and discussed them in a lot more detail. If you want the rules, you can go there, or I would encourage you if you have a gaming group. So if you have a group of players that played consistently at one location, at one store, I would just see about maybe pooling your money together and buying a group copy of these rules and talk to the store owner and see if there's a place at the store that you can leave them and come back to them, because they are neat to see, and there's a whole bunch of information in them. I don't know that it's worth let's see, it's $28 retail. I don't know that it's worth $28 for, in this case, you're getting one extra rule that you can toss in here if you're not a Mechanicum player, or if you are a Mechanicum player, right? It's probably not worth it. I got it for the channel. So there is that. But yeah, otherwise I probably wouldn't have purchased this. That said, here's the battlefield assets rule, which I love. So you get up to 2 asset points in 0 to 1,500 point games, which is fine. And you get up to 5 asset points in 1,500 to 3,000 point games. Again, that's fine. I actually think these numbers could probably be higher, but it is what it is. If you want to make it higher in your local group, that's fine. Battlefield assets are mounted on 40 to 60 millimeter bases. Again, I don't like the variations because a little bit of gaminess here. You are always going to want 60 millimeter bases because that increases the size of the effect. And frankly, it's just going to look cooler on a 60 millimeter base. We pay for these in asset points. So you have 5 asset points in a 3,000 point game, you can buy 5 asset points versus of battlefield assets. Now, the rules for these are pretty extensive, and I'm not going to copy paste the entire thing because they are like paragraphs of information, but we can go through these nevertheless and sort of talk about what they do. So the strategic cogitator is a 1 asset point cost. So I won't go through this every time, but you can see the cost on the screen. So you could, in theory, take 5 of these. I don't know why you would, but you can. And if you have a model with the command subtype nearby, let me make sure, get the rules correct. They can roll a dice, and if the dice is higher than the battlefield or the current battle turn, so this works better in the early game, you can increase the value of 1 secondary objective by 1. So if you are in a game where it's first strike 2, and you make your successful roll on first turn, and you roll a 2 or better, then you can increase the value of first strike to 3, which is somewhat useful. It just depends on how many secondaries you think you are going to score through the game, but it could be a useful thing. Definitely worth taking or considering, and offer some pretty cool modeling aspects to put cogitator, some sort of like computational engine on a base and be like, this is my strategic cogitator. We're going to put it on our deployment zone and have it there. Forward ammunition is 2 cost. And for this one, you are going to add 1 to the firepower of a ranged weapon if it's strength 5 or less, plus a whole bunch of other things like it can't be heavy, can't be ordnance, can't be blast, can't be a template. I think that's all of them. I'm looking at it right now. So there's that. This is, you could make this ammo crates or whatever you want it to be. I have a ton of bolters, just random bolters from different kits, especially the older edition of 40K. They would just have just bolters with handles that you can have. So maybe I'll put some on racks and create a base for this. But anyway, you can increase a unit within 3 inches can increase the firepower for those ranged weapons by 1. So if I had a unit of, if I don't get this right, let me know. I don't play Stardust. But if you had a unit of Space Marines within range of an objective, right? And stationary, that would get them to firepower 4 for their bolters. That seems really good. And if you're playing like Imperial Fists, like that seems outstanding. Would definitely do that. In addition, I think heavy bolters are strength 5. So you could do it with something like that. So there are some plays here. A lot of Volcates are strength 5 too. So you could have some fun with this. It does have the explosive trait, and the explosive trait just means that if I hit it with a shooting attack. So hang on, I'll just read this. If a blast marker covers the center of an asset marker with the explosive asset trait. So if we cover the trait on a 4-up, every unit within 6 inches suffers a number of hits equals to the asset point cost. So in this case, 2, and the hits are strength 8. So that's kind of fun, and they are breaching and shred, which is also fun. But you can basically blow them up, which is exciting. Disruption emitter costs 3, so this is really expensive. Remember, you only get 5 of these points, and this gives -1 leadership, willpower, cool, and int to a unit within 6 inches. And I think that's pretty much all it does. I'm just making sure. Yeah. And this is pretty cool because we can basically apply debuffs. This is really good for Mechanicum, for example, which has a lot of status effects, and so lowering leadership and willpower, and then throwing out like a Calexis Assassin or Thalaxi with the status effect on, not a status effect, attack cyberthurgic status on them, that can debuff them even more, right? You could get people down 1 or 2 or 3 leadership in some cases. I will note that they can be just removed from play. So you roll a dice and each time it happens, and on a 1 it just disappears, so it stops working. You can only take that if you're the attacker as well. So that's an attacker only option. Contingency device, one of my favorite, is just a big bomb. It's 2 cost. If you fail a panic test, so there's a lot that goes on. It's cool in theory. It's probably not great. So you have to fail a panic test, then you have to pass an int test. And if you pass, then it explodes to every model within 6 inches, which is pretty big off of a 60 millimeter base. And everything gets hit with a strength 7, AP 4, damage 2, breaching 5+, shred, spelled shred wrong, sorry, 6+ in here, which is, again, super fun. But you can only take this if you're the defender. It is explosive, so technically somebody could drop a blast marker on it and try and blow it up beforehand, but it just adds one more level of kind of fun to the game, where you could have your your Centurion or your Magos sitting on the contingency device being like, if they break through the lines, they're going with us, which is kind of fun. From here on, we are dealing with minefields. Minefields have their own special rule, but basically what happens is that if you move close to them, they can explode, and they can only be placed within, they have to be placed 6 inches away from other minefields. So you can't like stack them on top of each other. So we have three options. The frag minefield is really not great, honestly. It's a low chance of having multiple small blasts go off on a unit. And then blasts are AP5. So even against Solar Ox, this isn't going to do a lot. But basically, if a unit moves within 6 inches, so you just have to have one model within 6 inches, then every model within 6 inches, you roll a dice for, and on a 1, you put a 3-inch blast marker centered on that model. So if you're very careful about the way that you spread out a unit, this probably isn't going to do very much to you, especially because they know where it is. So it's neat in theory, but it's probably not a great points use. It could look cool. And if you like, again, there's nobody saying that you can't create a scenario where the defender just has minefields across the entirety of their front lines, right? So you have to go through the minefields, or you have to barrage the minefields before you go through. That's pretty cool. I like those for that perspective, that we could have a whole bunch of minefields, not just two, right? Because if you're spending 5 points, you can only have two frag minefields. Maybe we can have 12 minefields, and you have to kind of cross them through the battle, or make the attacker go through an entire table of minefields. It's you have 20 minefields to go through. That would be kind of fun. And over the course of a game, you would have to choose: do I want to go slowly through this minefield and trigger them one at a time, or do I want to risk getting hit by a bunch of strength 5 blasts, right? And that is kind of a fun way to play the game, because there's all sorts of sort of mini games around that. Do I throw Terminators at it because they're probably not going to die from this, or do I run vehicles up there and let them take the brunt of the attacks, because a Land Raider's not going to care about a strength 5 blast hitting it. There's a whole bunch of kind of things that we could do about it. I like it. Graviton Snare has a chance of pinning the unit. It's not it's got a pretty high chance, of pinning the unit, because you roll for every model. Let me make sure. Every model that is selected to move or makes a charge, and then you roll a dice for every model, and on a 1, that unit gains the pin tactical status. So that let's say you have 4 or 5 guys in range of this, because it doesn't explode, then you're probably going to get pinned. And then the Melt Minefield has a pretty low chance of vehicles or walkers taking a decent hit. It's probably a lot worse against walkers than it is against vehicles, but there's a possibility of doing some damage, and whatnot. It's pretty cool. The Graviton Snare, once it gets used, it's removed. I think the frag minefield on a 4-up is removed, and then the Melta minefield on a 4-up is removed once you use them. So a lot of words to describe some pretty cool effects. And also, just going to throw this out there again, this is a game. We get to play this for fun. If you want other things that you can add, I am probably going to come up with a battlefield asset for barbed wire, because I think that that's kind of a fun one, and it's easy to make. So do a barbed wire one, or do a tank traps one, right? Come up with whatever battlefield assets you want. It doesn't have to be just this list of 7 of these. We can do whatever we want for battlefield assets. You could have a phosphex pit, right? Like a trench full of phosphex. That would be cool, right? Whatever you think, whatever you want to use, make a rule for it and bring it to your group and play test it, and have some fun with these. It's a game. Like make it fun. All right. With that said, let's talk about the Onslaught mission primary objectives that are in the rule. So there's a lot of words to this rule. It's several paragraphs long. Those just reinforce the standard objective rules to the best of my knowledge. There is no additional thing that they're adding. However, what they do add is that defenders do not score victory points from controlling objectives. So if you're the defender in an Onslaught mission, Line does not matter. You are never going to score an objective marker. You can't. I mean, you can control them, but you can't score them. So you do lose line. So you can never have line. Which for Mechanicum, I'm always going to want to be the defender because I don't have line anyway. And if you had line, you gain Vanguard 2. If you don't already have a Vanguard X, which is interesting. So the wording again, sometimes the English of the English, if you're not familiar, there's a phrase that is the United States and Great Britain are two nations separated by a common language, and so sometimes I have a hard time understanding what they're saying. I think what they're saying is that all the defender models lose line and gain Vanguard. And that those two things are separate. So a unit that didn't have line would also gain Vanguard. Let me know in the comments what you think. I would always play it. Whenever I have a question like this, I always play it defaulting to whatever hurts me the most. So I would probably not give my guys Vanguard. But it is worth noting that I'm not aware of any unit that has line and Vanguard. And so yeah, if you lose line and all your units gain Vanguard 2, unless they already had Vanguard. So they can score Vanguard under the typical Vanguard things. The rest of this rule just says that it functions that way. In addition, the defender scores 1 victory point for each objective that the attacker does not control. So you just automatically have a base number of victory points that are coming in if your opponent is not scoring. So that's sort of the rule. And for all of these missions, this isn't in the rule, but there are 4 objectives per board, which I like because more objectives means that you have to kind of spread out and be a little bit more tactical about the way that you play. So that's the Onslaught mission primary objective rule that it's going to be part of all of the scenarios moving forward. We also have a prepare the battlefield rule in here. It just says that it's player placed terrain. The defender places the first piece of terrain, and then when we're all done, the defender can remove 1 piece of terrain from the attacker's half of the battlefield, which is fine. I don't like player placed terrain, or I don't like I place terrain and you place terrain. We should set up a scenario where it's narrative and where where we create a battlefield that looks like a battlefield, rather than being like, I'm going to place this L-shaped ruin on my side of the table so I can hide this strategic thing. Like, it just should look good. The spectacle is more important, I think. But yeah, whatever you want to do. I know that people have really strong feelings about this too, and that's fine. First turn is a little ambiguous. For one of the scenarios, I think the idea is that the defender goes first. We'll look at it in a minute. But it doesn't say who, because we're dealing with defender attacker rather than normal scenario rules. I'm not sure what the idea is. I think that you just go back to the step 7 deploy armies thing. You roll. The person that loses the roll is going to deploy first. And then based on step 8, the player who deployed first in step 7 takes the first player turn. That does seem to be the way it's meant to be. But if I missed something, again, please let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to acknowledge that. But I'm pretty sure that that's the way that rule is supposed to be implemented, at least for 2 of these scenarios. All right. Last but not least in our special objective rules is the advancing objectives rule. And this one's pretty important. So there's a lot to it, but it's also not super complicated. So the objective markers have designated locations. Generally speaking, they're going to start closer to the attacker's side of the board. And each time an objective marker is advanced, we're going to increase the value of the objectives by 1. So they start at 1, and then the actual physical objective markers go from 0 to 3. So we start at 1, they get advanced up the board, and they go to 2, and then they would advance up the board again and go to 3, and they can only go to a maximum of 3. And if for some reason an objective basically hits a table edge and can't get advanced any further, its value can still go up to that maximum of 3. The scenario rule for every single scenario, and I don't know why they didn't make this a universal thing, but that's that's fine. So the attacker can only ever score one objective per turn, and then each other objective marker has to be advanced at that point. And I'm going to check something real quick because I think it's regardless of whether or not they control them. Sorry, a little bit of bad radio here. No, it is every other objective marker that they control moves forward. So in order to increase the value of an objective, you have to have controlled it, but you can only ever score one. So the first turn, the attacker, if they have line 2, I don't know if there's line 3. I play Mechanicum, guys. There's no line in my entire army. So let's say you have line 2. You can only score 3 primary victory points on that first turn. One for the one objective that you are going to score, and then that objective is going to stay put. And then if you control, let's say there are 4 objectives, you control 3 of them. So then you score 1 for one of the ones that you control plus your line. So that's 3. The 2 that you didn't score, but you do control, those move forward, and then they become a value 2 objective. And then that 4th objective that you didn't control, that stays put. And because it stays put, it stays on 1. And your opponent, the defender, scores 1 point because you didn't control that objective. That is the way this works. It seems complicated, but once you kind of get your head around it, it makes a lot of sense. And it becomes really fun because now you've got this sort of like, I'm going to game out this thing. So let's imagine we have 4 objectives across the board, and I am going to score intentionally the kind of 3 on a flank. So I'm going to ignore the one to my right for sake of argument. When I score those objectives, if I want to sort of sweep my army around to my left and kind of push my opponent back on that edge, I'm going to score that rightmost objective that I control. That's going to stay put. The other 2 objectives that I don't score, those are going to both advance and become more points so that I can get more points next turn. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sweep my army around on my left flank and kind of push in on that edge, knowing that if I keep kicking those objectives forward, the value will keep going up. And so we can kind of like manipulate the values towards the end of the game, which is a really fun dynamic. I really like this concept. So yeah, it's a fun idea. I think that maybe it's not implemented in these scenarios quite as well as it could be, but I still love it. It's so cool. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, this is our scenario. So line advance is the first of our scenarios. Line advance is just dawn of war deployment. You are deployed on your side of the board. Your opponent's deployed on the other side of the board. The first 4 objective markers are just outside. They're on the attacker side of the board, but just outside of the deployment zone. So they're going to move forward and start scoring objectives and throwing them forward. Line advance is the simplest of these 3. We have some secondary missions, Slay the Warlord for 2, Giant Slayer for 1, Last Man Standing for 2, and First Strike for 1. If you're like, these seem a lot lower than the core missions, that's true. But keep in mind, the attacker is only ever going to score like 3 points on the first turn for primary, maybe 4 points on the second turn for primary, 5 points max on the third turn for primary, right? So these are not high scoring games. So Last Man Standing being worth 2 is actually pretty useful. And we can always up one of these with the strategic cogitator, I think, battlefield asset. In terms of our special rules, we get the advancing objectives rule, which we talked about. We get the battlefield assets rule, which again, we talked about. The reserves rule, which is pretty universal to all of them. That's just a standard one. And seize the initiative. So you could, in theory, push forward and seize the initiative for this mission. So this is if you're going to play one of these and you're like, I don't want it to be super complicated, this is a good one to do. I like this one. It's pretty straightforward and easy to play. The next mission is Breakthrough. So this is the one that I have played. Unfortunately, I haven't had a lot of games lately. So Breakthrough is slightly different deployment. The attacker is very much a Dawn of War style thing, but the defender is sort of in a 4x4 box. So for sort of splitting the table up into equal portions, the defender has sort of a more forward position, but their flanks are exposed. In this mission, we are going to deploy the left and right objectives closer to the attacker side of the board. And then the defenders, the center two objectives are placed closer to well, they're actually placed in the defenders part of the board. So for this mission, again, the attacker only scores one objective, then we kick the rest forward. Secondary objectives, we've slayed the Warlord for 2, Giant Slayer for 1, Last Man Standing for 2, and First Strike for 1, exact same as before. In that, again, we are not scoring a lot of points in these missions, so it's not a big deal to not have the points be very high for the secondaries. For our special rules, we get the advancing objectives again, battlefield assets again. We get reserves and we get C as the initiative, but we get one additional special rule for this scenario, and that is encircling reinforcements. So if the defender brings models on from reserve, they can bring them on from the short battlefield edges. So they can basically outflank the attacker. A couple of thoughts on this scenario, since I have played it. Be very careful how far forward you put your models as the defender. You probably want to contest those objectives, but keep in mind a couple of things. One, Vanguard is a thing, so you can score Vanguard points, but also a lot of models can, like a Rhino can just move forward and disembark and charge now. So it is very easy for your opponent to get a first turn charge in the scenario if they want. So be back far enough, be ready to do your what's it called, your reaction move off of an objective to kind of keep them from charging you turn one and getting control of those objectives, because it is very easy to do. In addition, just because I'm thinking about it now, the kicking things forward and the Vanguard rule don't really work particularly well together. So also be sort of aware of that sometimes Vanguard can be really useful in these scenarios, and other times it's not great. So if your opponent is controlling the objective and scoring it, you can Vanguard them off at the next turn. But if they're scoring or controlling the objective but not scoring it, they're not going to be on it during your next turn. So there is that. All right, and the last of our scenarios is Dawn Raid. This one's interesting. So all the objectives on this one are on the defender's side of the map. They're all on the defender's half of the board, and everybody's deploying sort of diagonally. I'm not sure what the name for this deployment is in the core book, but it's your diagonal corner to half board deployment. So there's about I want to say about like 24 inches between you and the defender. So gives you sort of Dawn of War style distances. And I think the idea of this one is to sort of push a flank on this, which is interesting. We have all the same rules that we had before. The attacker can score one objective and advance the rest. The secondary objectives are Slay the Warlord for 2, Giant Slayer for 1, Last Man Standing for 2, First Strike for 1. Our special mission rules are advancing objectives, battlefield assets, and reserves, but not seize the initiative, because we have a special rule here for seize the initiative, which is once the defender deploys all their units first, which means that they would be going first turn. But then the attacker rolls the dice, and on a 4-up, the attacker takes the first turn, which is interesting. I don't know. Like it's a cool idea. I'm not sure what they're going for with that, aside from just like the defender's going to deploy first, and 50% of the time the attacker's just going to go first. Like I don't know. It would be interesting if there was a different sort of mechanic here. But yeah, you should be aware that there's a surprise attack. The attacker almost should go first, just because the objectives are so far back. It's going to be really hard for the attacker to score on turn one, except for their sort of leftmost objective. But yeah, so those are the scenarios that are here. And we'll pause real quick and talk about some of our thoughts and ideas around here. So I really like the fact that number one, we're sort of doing away, at least on one side, with line in a conventional sense. I think that line and Vanguard are interesting rules, but maybe poorly implemented rules. I think that line giving you plus your line X for every single model is really rough. So again, if you're a Space Marine player and you played mostly against Space Marines, you probably aren't aware of sort of this huge disparity that's here. Weirdly, if you're a Space Marine player and you've played against Solar Auxilia, you're probably very familiar with this disparity. But basically, if if I have 10 models without line on an objective and you have 10 models with line on an objective, you are scoring 30 control points for that, and I'm scoring 10 control points for that. So you are always going to push me off. A unit of five, a Stardust, are going to just regular tactical Marines are going to out control up to 9 Myrmidons on an objective, which is just weird to me. It's just a weird, you know, your 5 tactical Marines have more control over that objective than 9 Terminators. It's weird. I don't know what the solution is. I think maybe it would be better that if you have models with line on an objective, they just add the line at the end. So a unit of 10 tactical Marines on an objective have a control of that objective of 12. That's probably much more reasonable. But yeah, I think the very first game I played of Horus Heresy Third Edition, I had my Magos and 2 Castellex on an objective, and my opponent deep struck a drop pod on that objective, put 2 tactical Marines on that objective, and took it from me. And that's just weird. It's just a weird. I don't know. It feels disproportional. Similarly, the scoring for line is really weird. Line units score a lot. You know, when you have a line unit on an objective marker that's worth 2 or 3 points, that's 4 or 5 points in a single turn that you're getting from that objective marker. And because you could, do that 2 or 3 times across the battlefield, that's a big swing if your opponent doesn't have a line unit on an objective marker. So I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to make tactical Marines really, really strong, and I like that. I think that's good. Your base infantry should be good, but it is also a little unbalanced. So I like the fact that these scenarios are sort of undoing that and walking that back a little bit. I don't know that Vanguard is the way to do it, but I don't know. I genuinely don't know how to fix Vanguard because it took like 0.5 seconds for the community to realize, oh, well, if I just reactive move away from the objective, you don't get your Vanguard points, which doesn't feel great, but I understand sort of the tactics of it and that sort of thing. So I like the trajectory of we're kind of pushing away from line and Vanguard. I would like to see a little bit more of that in the future, and maybe a little bit more. Let's come up with interesting ways that we can utilize, because units are pointed based on whether or not they have Vanguard or line. So let's figure out ways that we can incorporate those aspects into the game without, making them worthless or unbalanced or, whatever it is. I also like the idea that we're changing the objective marker values. I know that's weird because the core mission that changes the objective values and they go down every time you score it. I really hate that mission. Like I probably will never actively or voluntarily play that mission again. But I do like this idea that we can make objectives worth more, or that we can change the value based on how they score. Yeah, I think that that's interesting. I mean, let's take advantage of the fact that the objective markers have numbers on them, and that we can just change the objective markers out and put different numbers down. That is definitely something we can do, and we can play with. The idea of kicking them forward, right, where you have to choose as the attacker which ones are moving forward, which ones do you want to score later in the game versus earlier in the game, which ones don't you want to go for because you want them to be sort of back in your backfield, and you can park a I don't know, a vindicator on it and score at some point. I guess vehicles don't score objectives. But get something, a Deredeo Dreadnought on it and score it at some point and just get a point and kick it forward. I like that idea. That's a cool aspect to it. I really like battlefield assets. I think we should just, as a community, come up with like a dozen more and just add them, and probably increase battlefield asset points, so that we can really have some fun with those. Yeah, I like these missions. I think I mentioned earlier. I played the first wave mission twice now. I've played the whichever the second one in here. I'll just look at it real quick. The breakthrough mission once, and with both of those missions, each time I've played them, I've been like, yeah, if I played this mission again, I would do it completely different, or I would do this and this and this different. I like that aspect of the game. The replayability is very nice. I feel like I could play Breakthrough again as the defender, and I would play a completely different game than what I played the first time. And I know that my opponent said that they had played that scenario before, and that each time that they played it, or they had played those types of scenarios before, and each time that they play them, they feel like they've learned something and could do better next time, which is exactly where we want to be as a community. We want to have that ability to play the same scenario over and over and over, and have it not get stale and not get boring, and always be engaging. And so, like I said, this is all kind of prelude to, at some point, we're going to try to make some scenarios that sort of check all the boxes, so that other people can play them. I know that other groups are doing it. I think SN Battle Reports put out a bunch of scenarios relatively recently. I know that Rob from the Honest Heresy has at least a different format of the game and some new rules for Line and Vanguard that they're playing with. So I like this. I think that the community should come together and sort of rectify this problem that Games Workshop has inadvertently presented us with. But that's it for today. Thanks for hanging out for so long, and I will catch you in our next video.